once they decide that something has to become a part of clinical guidelines, then the guidelines get published. The guidelines publication to actual adoption in a community setting of anything is 17 years gap. 17 years. And that was like a very stark realization that I can keep like generating new evidence. It's not going to see the light of the day till like I'm 60, 70 years old.
Welcome back to another episode of the Doctors and Dollars podcast. I'm your host, Nate Crannell. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Rahul Chaudhary, a leading cardiologist with a passion for integrating cutting-edge technology into healthcare. Dr. Chaudhary is pioneering the use of AI and machine learning to improve cardiovascular care and patient outcomes as it relates to prescriptions. He's published over 100 peer-reviewed papers and is currently serving at the VA Pittsburgh Health System. Welcome, Rahul.
Thanks, Nate, for the introduction. It's really nice to be here.
Absolutely. What's going well today?
Well, it's a Wednesday. It's midweek, but it truly feels like the weekend still.
Why is that?
Well, like my daily schedule is essentially the same. So it's like a weekday, weekend. It's all the same.
Oh God. Yeah. So I mean, even Saturday, Sundays could feel like a Tuesday to you.
Yeah, like the only difference is that the kids go to school on weekdays and on the weekends they go for activities. So
otherwise, it's all blend. Are you one of those guys where somebody's like, "Hey, let's go do something on Thursday," and you're like, "Wait, what day is it today?"
It actually truly is. Like I have to like keep a track of which day it is. Like, and the way I keep a track of it is through the meetings that I have.
There you go. I live religiously off my Google Calendar, so like during the week, I know I'm staring at that thing. But God bless the Apple Watch, because I just have the interface of my Apple Watch has the date and the time and the temperature, and so it's like if I get any type of those questions from people, whether it be from someone who wants to do something or even my kids who are like, "Is it hot outside?" It's like, all right, look at the Apple Watch. That's been my saving grace the last couple of years. So. I don't know do you have a tool that like just keeps you centered so that while your days are mixing together, it still feels manageable?
I think like I have a very set, like I have like my weekly goals. Like I know when my week is ending, because if my goals are not being met, like that's like basically me like starting to do like more late nighters and trying to get that rolling. But that's in a way, like I don't have daily, like I don't keep a good track of the daily like grind, but I keep a good track of the weekly grind.
Okay, that makes sense. Are you a list guy? Like I love a to-do list. Our team knows that I love a to-do list. So it's like, hey, by the end of the week, we got, this point that we want to hit. Nate, here's your 5 or 6 things that we need you to do by Friday. Is that kind of the same for you?
Oh, 100%. Like you have to, like in my thought process is, if it's in your head, you should put it in a list and prioritize it so that you know exactly where it lies in terms of your priorities. And if you just keep it in your head, it clogs up your head and it's like you can't focus on the actual activity that you're supposed to do. So it's like I'm definitely very much of a list guy.
And you really have to be. I mean, you got a lot of irons in the fire between research, between AI. I know you go out and do talks. You have clinic days still. You're trying to limit those, but you still have days in clinic. You got a lot of things you got to juggle, along with your wife being an anesthesiologist as well. We talked about that offline. I mean, you got a lot of things that you're working on. So I'm not surprised that you said you're a list guy.
Yeah, it's almost an imperative. Like you can't live without it.
Do you? Let me ask you this, because I think my wife is the same way, but I meet so many people who are very busy in their lives that one person is a list person that is like, they get such satisfaction from checking off, boxes on their list. And then they marry someone who is not a list person. They're a fly by the seat of their pants. We'll get it done, in whatever way we get it done. Is your wife that way, or is she also a list person?
So it's fascinating. Like the way we blend together is I am more of a long-term picture, like working through it every day in a little bit, like in like one step a day type of person. So I focus more on the long-term lists, and she actually focuses more on the short-term, day-to-day lists. So she's
That helps.
like I tell her that like you're the 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 chief operating officer of our household, and I'm more of the chief visionary officer.
Yeah. That's really good. The innovation guy. I say the same thing to my wife. She's definitely the COO. I also give her the CEO title because, I mean, let's be honest, she kind of runs the whole thing.
Oh, absolutely.
I've been graced with the idea man, but also the CFO. Like I just handle all the finances naturally, but it's just funny how we all have our roles, and then how everyone seems to kind of give each spouse that title, and everyone's got their responsibilities. That's how things run smoothly.
The interesting part is that everyone has like this integration that happens as two individuals meet. And you have like this type A, like people usually categorize personalities as type A or type B. But truly, like it's like everyone has both personalities. It's just the task that you're looking at. Like for me personally, like I'm very type B in the way I conduct my life, but I'm extremely type A when I'm doing research or any of the things that I truly care about, like or in my mind, like I truly care about. And the same goes with like the type A and type B like activities of my wife. It's more about like you align your type A and type B activities at the same frequency, and I think that's what makes like a good harmonious couple.
There you go. Are you saying align your type A's at the same time, or there always needs to be someone that's A and someone that's B at the same time?
Ideally, like whenever I feel like there's conflict, that's when both your type A's are coming in. That like I prefer it this way, no, I prefer it that way. But if your type A and type B are like if I'm type A on certain things and she's type B on them, and I'm type B on certain things and she's type A on them, that's like a perfect like harmonious integration.
I like that. The insight there, because that's definitely people probably feel that way, but they've never actually categorized it as like, hey, when's my A coming out versus when is my spouse's A coming out, and how do we do this dance?
I feel like there's also like this like exactly like how you described it. It's a dance. So sometimes you take a step back, like you realize that I'm not as type A about it as she is, so maybe I'll just become a little type B about it. So like let's look at the bigger picture.
For your sanity, for your safety, so that she doesn't kill you. Yeah, I'm going to be type B in this situation. You go ahead, honey. You take type A here. That's good. So you grew up in India. Were your parents the same way? Was that just? Are you a product of your surroundings, or I guess in my mind, knowing your professional background and all the work that you're doing, did you become that type A list taking type person once you started doing research? Like, where was it chicken before the egg, or tell me about that?
So I feel like going, and of course, like the hindsight is 50-50. Like you always like you go back and you can build up a whole story because you already know where you are and like how you are today. But I do think like back even when I was in 10th grade, like I had like my 5-year plan, my 10-year plan. And interestingly enough, like I tried to veer off, like, and I would share that vision with my parents, like that this is what I'm thinking. Hopefully by this year, I should have like this, and this like major milestones in life. And then I would like try to veer off of my path and try exploring different things, trying to quit what I was thinking or visioning. It always ends up like that. Like I end up doing like the things end up happening the way I originally thought they would. And these like little side roads like end up getting clipped off, like how they were, I guess, supposed to be.
Yeah. I got to imagine though, in 10th grade, you were not on your 5-year or 10-year plan was not doing AI and machine learning research and getting your MBA and all those things. I got to imagine it was, I want to be a doctor. I'm going to go to medical school. Then I'm going to go to the United States. That was probably the plan. It's fascinating to me, and I got some more follow-up questions to this. But like, what was on that when you were in 10th grade? What was on that 5-year plan?
I think the first thing was like I always like, and this I still do this all the time. I always try to categorize my plans as like as specific as possible as they're closer to me, and as like vaguish, but like having some semblance of like some form as they're further away in terms of number of years. So like I had a very clear, well-defined pathway of like, I'm going to do this studying and I'm going to go to this school, because we had 11th and 12th grade and then you directly went to med school. And
Oh,
that's,
okay.
yeah, it's a very different med school system in India. So I had like this immediate pathway that I was looking at and exactly what I need to do to get there. But then like the benefit of having more of a vague long-term form is essentially like you're able to change it or give it more character, give it more meaning as time progresses, and that becomes more near term.
And you obviously were tweaking it right along the way, because you leave 12th grade in India, you get to go straight to med school. 4 years of med school, I'm assuming it's probably about the same.
It's actually 5.5.
Ooh, 5.5. Look at that. All right. So 5.5 years of med school, where you came out with internal medicine. But if everyone remembers when I was doing your introduction, I introduced you as a leading cardiologist. So where in that point were you an internal medicine doctor looking ahead at your 5-year plan, and cardiology became like, ooh, that's now a new goal within the next 5 years?
So I always knew I wanted to be a heart doctor. Of course, like before going into medical school, you're not very clear about what that means.
Okay.
So like in the first 2.5, 3 years, I wanted to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. I actually came to Methodist Houston, did like a month and a half long elective, and in like research. It was still a research elective, but it was like partly like looking at how the clinical workflow works in actually CT vascular surgery. That was my first publication. I actually came and wrote a review article and like just summarizing the research the lab that I was working with was doing. But then like I went back to India and I was like, yeah, I don't want to be a surgeon. So it's going to be like more like the medicine pathway.
Yeah.
and then things became a little bit more clear what a heart doctor would mean. It would mean like going through an internal medicine training and then becoming doing a cardiology fellowship.
Yeah. Was that because of the love of your talking to people and solving people problems versus, I mean, cardiothoracic surgery is exactly like it sounds. You are down in there in a heart doing actual surgery. Is it more the human interaction that you loved?
Yeah, I think it's more like for me, there's like a difference whenever you're trying to think of a procedure versus like a non-procedural field. Like the questions you're asking yourself are, do I like my physical actual like muscle memory skills? Is that like what truly drives me? Or what drives me is like just thinking about it and backtracking mechanisms. And that was the nuanced understanding that I developed, that it's, for me personally, I like the more of the intellectual, like what if scenarios and the myriad of choices of what we can do, what we should do, and the human interaction and like trying to get the right information out of the person that you're talking to,
Gotcha.
making it clinically meaningful and something that they can actually change in their life. Not just like me changing a part of the body, and that's like a personal choice.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you started practicing when you came to the United States. You were in Baltimore, I believe. Right. I mean, the intellectual part. I mean, the next institution I mentioned is all about the intellectual part. You went to Mayo. Was that for research, or was that to continue to advance the intellectual part of your cardiology mastery, I guess I could say?
So when I was doing my internal medicine training, like I knew that I wanted to become a cardiologist. Like that's something that I had in the back of my head, like right from the med school. So I realized like when I came here that field entails a lot of research, at least getting into it entails a lot of research, and that's like a highly respectable thing. And whatever you publish is something that's like a record in the databases of humanity, that it might help people across the world practice something. So I found that very, very interesting. But initially it was more so like driven, like because I was trying to do a cardiology fellowship, I wanted to do research. After like a few papers or so, like I just got interested in the field of research, the way the methodology of research is, because it's summarized like essentially like everything that you think about a checklist can be incorporated as like an introduction of whatever field, and this can be like translated across the spectrum of every single like essentially specialty or non-specialty or like business, like no matter what field it is, that there is an introduction or a background or lay of the land, and that's what you call market research. Then there is like this methods of what exactly like what is it that you want to do? Where do you want to do it? Where is the gap? And how are you going to do it? How are you going to test it? And how are you going to show value? And that's basically methods. And results is the execution of this and reflecting back as to what essentially you tried, which methods you used, what the results were. And then discussion is basically just trying to make sense of all of it, that like this is the novel thing that I've developed. And in the entrepreneurial space, discussion is when you go and present to venture capital firms to get more funding. But
Yep.
this is like basically like everything can be translated into research, and that's something that was a very powerful frame of reference that I developed because I was churning papers pretty quickly, and that really shaped how I think about like essentially everything in my life. So the early years in Baltimore were mostly focused around trying to get my skills, developing, like doing 2 postdoc research fellowships, basic science, that is like just bench work. At the same time, I was also doing translational research, and also I got involved in quality improvement research because I wanted to, like, I'm one of those people who only does something once I've tried it myself. Like otherwise, like I would give the other thing benefit of doubt. So then I realized like my passion truly belonged to like more like translating research that takes a little bit of like the bench work part, and it takes a little bit of the implementation part, so that I'm implementing, like I'm developing new techniques and finding their positioning in the actual patient management. So that's what stuck with me, and that's what like drove me. But while I was working as an internal medicine physician, like one thing, like a stark realization came to me that my schedule and the priorities of the organizations are such that in the internal medicine world, it's not like you don't get as much, at least as a hospitalist, you don't get as much time or as much focus for research. So it truly was just a side hobby for me for the longest period of time. And then like after after I was done with a few years of work in Baltimore, I figured like maybe it's time to explore a little bit more, like find a place where internal medicine hospitalists can actually get resources and are promoted towards research. And that like essentially led me to several interviews at different places, and different places have different expectations. But Mayo was like the one that resonated the most with me.
And like, how much of your research, as you were doing all these different research things and kind of figuring out what really drove you, how much of that is, and this is going to sound like a naive financial advisor question, but like, how much of that is following like the scientific method of like make a hypothesis, test it out, publish your findings? Because to me, I mean, that I'm just thinking about like 10th grade science class where you're like trying to create smoke out of some liquid. But for you, a lot of this is computer based. And so I'm trying to, as you were talking about doing the research, publishing a paper, and then, with translational, trying to figure out how does this apply to the real world, how much of that is following like a scientific method, or how much of it is just cause and effect?
I think the first thing is that like people always because I was, when I was on the other side, before I started diving too deep into this field, like the question of like how do you even come up with the right ideas?
Right. That's where I'm going.
Yeah, like, and that's what I figured, like that's where you're coming from, like what's the idea that people care about that's important, and how do you pursue it? How do you form a hypothesis around it? Like what I realized was that initially you do not come up with your own ideas. You have to work with someone, and that's where the mentorship model comes in. So I worked with like a leading expert, Dr. Gerbo. He's like an interventional cardiologist, and he's done a lot of great work in platelets and like an anticoagulation personalization of therapy. So like where like anticoagulants or antiplatelets, which ones should be the one that certain patients should have and the other patients shouldn't. And his work was focused around like taking blood samples and using those samples to help figure out like what the right medication should be for them. So I dove really deep, and like I've been working with him for about 11 years now. And with all the stuff that he was doing, so I did what he asked me to do, and I basically went through the ringer of like doing every single thing myself, like from enrolling patients to doing data entry, to like learning how to do data analysis,
Mm-hmm.
then writing manuscripts, and then like looking into how grants are administered, and then like looking more like broader perspective on how clinical trials are run and how they're designed. And as I went through this process, without even realizing, I started having my own ideas, and my own ideas that were a little bit divergent and a little bit like similar but divergent, like little subfields within this. So I developed, like, that's what I started developing. But at the same time, like when I went to Mayo, I started doing an MBA, and like I got tapped into doing like machine learning based research, because like I was one of the researchers, as well as like having a background of MBA. Like we tried to do a machine learning model to predict hospital census, and adjust staffing models. So that experience like really helped me grow, in terms of trying to define how can I marry all my interests, like because I developed an interest in AI. How is it that I can get AI, personalization of therapy, management into one stream of thing, and cardiology into like one single like tied vision. Like my answer to that is like essentially what I'm pursuing now. It's basically like developing software solutions that can house machine learning models, which help personalize therapy in the cardiovascular patients. So this is like it's a part of implementation science, and that's the MBA part of it. There's this AI part of machine learning modeling. The actual model is like developed through the machine learning. The personalization aspect is what I learned through the biomarker pathways. And then the clinical cardiology space is like where like my questions arise from. So this is like how it all like panned out to be.
Gotcha. No, that it makes way more sense now. I think I was looking at it the wrong way. I was looking at it more as like you're not trying to invent something brand new, right? I think of like cars were everywhere in the early 1900s, and then somebody's like, you know what, we should have something that flies in the sky, and like I'm going to invent that. You're going from the other way. Like you guys were identifying, you and your partner were identifying a problem that you were facing, and so then it's kind of like reverse research of like, how do we solve this problem that already exists, and you're starting from there, and how do we leverage technology and AI and all of these different systems to solve a problem that's already there. It's not like you guys were trying to invent something brand new out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, like there's precedence to it. It's just that it's almost like there's knowledge across different fields, and different fields have already like developed a good amount of knowledge in certain aspects. But there is no equalizing force. There is like no one who has enough breadth and depth of expertise to be able to translate them across fields. And that's what I'm realizing, the benefit that I'm deriving as I'm progressing more and more in my studies, about how like my thoughts in one domain can really help development of another domain.
How, because I do want to get in, I want to talk about your research that you're doing, because I think it's super interesting. But I think maybe one thing that you found that really got you more excited about doing this and building something bigger as it relates to research is you had told me you found a gap between what research doctors were doing and what they were finding, and then the actual application of that out in the field, right, in the clinical side of things. So how are these findings implemented? I mean, if a research doctor, let's say you find something amazing or you create something amazing next year, how does that then get out into the field? How's that implemented? And then why do a lot of doctors not even know? There's probably a whole host of doctors who don't even know you're doing this research within cardiology, to know like, oh yeah, Rahul's got this coming, like it'll be here in a year and it's going to be amazing. Like why is there that gap in between research and actual application?
The biggest issue is not having the right platform. Like YouTube is a platform that democratized availability of any type of videos or education or whatnot. In terms of research, whatever researchers do, like right now, it's so disjointed that people could be searching for 10 different blood biomarkers in their own fields, and they would come up with their own hypothesis. But there is no unifying place where they can pit against each other. What additional value of understanding of predictiveness is this new way of looking at things helping us with that we don't already have? And that's like what I realized a machine learning approach, which is housed in a software, can actually do. It's not just like, yeah, like I'm going to help this patient get this medication or that medication. It's also which test would help it, like which future test could be tested against this algorithm, and to show that it actually adds more value, or it doesn't add value, and maybe like it helps improve our understanding of the mechanisms. But it's like, and that's a very very interesting difference, that like this more towards understanding new pathways and maybe coming up with new medications or new like blood tests in the future, or is it actually translatable to patient care? So this like almost this whole concept almost acts like a platform in and of itself.
Where can people find this now? And when I say people, I mean other doctors, cardiologists, people who would need to know about, hey, these 10 different blood markers, and here's what we're looking for, and here's testing to current patients versus future anomalies, things like that. Where is that housed today? Or is that the issue, and what you're trying to solve is you're trying to fill that gap in between the research and the clinical?
So right now, like the way it works, the way any research comes to clinical practice is that it gets published. There's enough number of papers on the same topic across different populations that get published on a similar topic. After that, when there's enough evidence, then these committees within organizations like ACC, AHA, they sit down and the experts talk amongst themselves to figure out like what's the evidence, how does that translate, and should this be a part of clinical guidelines now? Once they decide that something has to become a part of clinical guidelines because there's such evidence that it has such a benefit, then the guidelines get published. The guidelines publication to actual adoption in a community setting of anything is 17 years gap. 17 years, yes. So whatever,
Wow.
and that's essentially what one of my frustrations was, that I was publishing like in 7-8 years, I published over 100 papers on novel projects and novel places where we were finding blood biomarkers. But as I switched from institution to institution, people didn't even know about that, because like even though it's becoming a part of guidelines, because some of my papers have been cited in guidelines, but people still don't even know about those blood tests. And that was like a very stark realization that like essentially like I can keep like generating new evidence. It's not going to see the light of the day till like I'm like 60, 70 years old. And
Wow.
how can I reduce that gap of translating research into clinical practice? And this machine learning software, like this project, like I feel like it was just destiny at that time that I got involved in this project. And that is what triggered my pivot towards like a completely new field. Because in India, we don't have undergrad. So like I actually just went to med school. So whatever education I'm taking right now, I'm doing a master's of applied machine learning. But whatever education I'm taking, I am doing all the coursework that undergrad people do on my own time, in order to get to the level of like being a master's student. Because apparently once you've done enough education, you cannot go back and do undergrad in another field.
That is true. That is true. They don't let you come back in and hang out with the other 18-year-olds. They say, listen, you've been to school enough, man. Let's stop doing that. That gap, 17 years, I don't know, my jaw hit the floor. I'm sure the camera was on you when you said it, but like my first thought is the number of patients that could have been helped in that 17 years, from the time that you had this discovery, figure out how it can be applied within clinical, to then publishing a paper. Like it, to me, it's like, okay, somebody published a paper and they're like, hey, go check out Rahul's paper. Okay, let's start talking about it. I would think a year or two, maybe 3 years at the most. I would think between time of like, he published this makes sense. How can we work this into a hospital or clinical setting? Like 17 years is so long. Like I think of like, so I'm friends with an orthopedic surgeon. He does like knees and ankles and stuff. Like he uses some brace. I can't think of the name of it, like an internal brace in a knee when he's doing a knee surgery. But like I can imagine if that got developed today, like how many knee surgeries he does over the next 17 years that could have been using this specific brace that would have changed the impact of somebody's life. Like that's wild to me. And now we're talking cardiology. And so it's like, you're talking the heart, probably the most important organ we have. And we're waiting 17 years most often to get some of this groundbreaking research actually into practice.
I mean, like, to be honest,
It's a
like
huge disconnect.
the centers that develop as like centers of excellence and like the places that become like the premier institutes for any particular subspecialty, like the biggest what their infrastructure actually helps them develop is this translation of research. They actually reduce this time of research like in guidelines to actual practice and personalization. And because of that, they have better outcomes. And because they have better outcomes, they become like these like excellent centers of excellence. And that's basically like how like our entire like medical industry is structured right now.
It's strictly like whoever's the top dog that can come out and prove that this works first. Hey, that place is excellent. But they're just the ones that are implementing it sooner. It sounds like.
Right,
They're
that
taking
also,
they're taking the
because
chance.
then it becomes like more of a like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then people who are very much at the forefront want to go and practice in such centers too, because they promote innovation, and they promote innovation, so more innovation comes out of them, and the more faster it's translated. It's like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Why is the gap there then? That if something gets published, is it just places aren't wanting to take the risk? Like they want to see absolutely every data point possible and know that it's 100% accurate before they put it into clinic? Or there's just not enough centers out there that are willing to be like, hey, what Rahul posted sounds pretty good. Let's test it out and see how it works.
Well, there's two aspects to it. One is the sheer volume of number of publications that come out every single day.
Okay.
It's like mind-boggling the amount of research that comes out every single day.
Okay.
That's one aspect. So you almost like need like the whole like knowledge acquirers. So it's very dependent upon like the fields in and of themselves to actually be able to acquire, keep themselves up to speed from all this knowledge. The second aspect is the administration side. So as a clinician, you can be completely up to speed with the latest literature, with the guidelines, with like you're willing to apply it. But then you also the way healthcare is designed in this country is that the insurers need to approve it, and the healthcare administration of the hospital system needs to have mechanisms and interactions with the insurance to be able to provide that actual medicine or whatever test to any particular patient. And that's where like the systems issue come in. And that was like my whole purpose of me doing an MBA, to understand where there are gaps in these like system issues. How can you fill them? And can technology play a role there?
I am super excited to introduce to you the Doctors and Dollars 5-Day Financial Challenge. I'm Mike Neubauer, I'm CEO of Grand Vision Companies, and I'm the one that you see on the Wealth Wednesday and Daily Dollar episodes with Nate. So Nate and I are partnering again to do something even more exciting, which is the 5-Day Challenge. We're taking the best of all of our episodes, all of our expertise and knowledge, and we're condensing it into an impactful and purposeful 5-day presentation, 1 hour per day, for 5 days, to give you everything you need to build that foundation for your financial future. So if you're looking to gain the pieces, you want those puzzle pieces and find out how they fit in your financial plan, head over to the Doctors and Dollars website, join us on the 5-day challenge. We're putting it together for free, so you got nothing to lose. We look forward to seeing you on the inside.
To me, it sounds like there's just too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Right? Too many decision makers that need to be made, whereas like if there are trained, well-established, respected physicians who say, hey, this research looks like it works, and we've tested it in multiple ways and it works, let's get it going. The fact that there's other decision makers out there that probably don't practice medicine, they'll never sit in front of a cardiology patient, they'll never perform a cardio surgery. Too many cooks in the kitchen. That's the way I'm going to simplify it down, is what I'm hearing you say.
But it's fascinating, because this actually ties to your field. At the end of the day, we don't have unlimited finances. So like if you had unlimited finances, then you could potentially give every test and every medication to every patient. But because of these financial decisions, like there's a lot of financial decisions that come into play. If you had unlimited resources, that would be a very different world. But because we have limited resources, but an unlimited plethora of diseases that we are identifying and trying to treat at different stages, it just becomes like you have to make certain decisions. I don't necessarily blame them either. Like they're also constrained by finances, and they look at more statistics and numbers and try to figure out what is the optimal level where we can give the best care to the community while still sustaining functionality. because if the system collapses because of financial issues, then that harms the whole community way more than what sacrificing certain treatments would.
That makes sense. Let's talk specifically about research and what you're doing. Tell me what the hypothesis was. The research that started. You got a machine learning. You're essentially building a system that houses the machine learning that then helps physicians make decisions. Talk to me about the kind of that latter part and what your optimal outcome is. Say that you've already published papers on it, but like actual getting this into clinic and working. What's the optimal outcome there based on what you're working on right now?
So I can tell you like my essentially my next 3-4 years of life. That basically integrates like everything like that you're asking right now.
Okay.
So essentially, what I'm planning, like what I'm right now, one thing that I'm realizing as I'm doing more and more coding is, and this is where like I feel like my management actually really helps, because during my MBA coursework and like how I perceived it is that. There is no fixed system in the world. Like there is no, like there might be like Boston Consulting Group matrix or whatever, but there is no system. Like that system was developed when a certain problem arose, and in order to help quantify the problem and help create processes around it, that system was developed. And that's why it's applicable to only certain like range of things. It's not like universally applicable. So essentially, like any system can be developed from scratch and in any which way, because there is no right or wrong answer. As long as it produces the result, is reproducible, and that's like the research methodology talking for me. As long as it's reproducible and you have an end goal in mind and you're looking at the product, so the means as well as the end goal, like as long as everything's aligned, that's when the most optimal system can be designed. So the beauty about this whole concept of integrating things on a computer is you can actually take your mental thought. Like I almost look at it like from a Harry Potter's movie, like where like in this like Dumbledore takes like this like one memory from Harry Potter and puts it in this like little pan. And like that's like one thing that always comes in my mind in terms of my imagination. And then like that thing plays out in this like external world, in this hypothetical space. So the way like the computer systems are, the more you do coding, the more you understand coding. Like knowing what the problems are that you want to identify, if you can just translate those into step by step processes and actually design them in a way that you think, it's something that can be a significant multiplier factor. So what I'm trying to develop right now are systems that automate the whole process of like a research question to like generation of data sets to generation of like initial analysis of data. And then based upon that, like just having like a few clicks here and there. So it's like almost like a proprietary software of sorts. Then taking the machine learning modeling approach as well, because that like the benefit of learning it myself is that I can actually put it somewhere and I think very methodically through things. So developing that whole pipeline and not just stopping there, like publishing it is one aspect of like dissemination and making sure that other people know what's happening. The other part is implementing it. And that's where like housing a software solution, developing a software which can house a machine learning model that is ever evolving, because that's one of the other things that this software is not the same as your traditional software, because in traditional software you go from A to B and a certain set of processes, and the B is always reliably, if A is put in, then B will always reliably be output. Here, it changes over time. It could be a C or a D or a D, because it's probabilistic. It's not like it's based off on the probabilities and the changing probabilities. So housing like a machine learning model in a software that can hook into Epic or Cerner, and something that the physician or clinician who's taking care of a patient, they can look at it and be able to understand, or at least get a sense of where it's coming from, like what are the major factors for any single patient that help determine their risk of one event or another, and knowing that, the personalized risk part, and the recommended medication regimens is what can truly help someone in the front lines as a clinician to be able to communicate to the patients and help like more shared decision making, because it's more informed. Like sometimes we throw out numbers based off on clinical trials, but really clinical trials are based off of 6,000, 7,000, 10,000, 20,000 patients. We're living in like more than like 100, 200 million patients. Like it's a very much of a far stretch to extrapolate everything based off on like these like thousands of patients. So that's where like this machine learning and housing it in a software comes in. So in terms of what I'm doing personally is I'm right now getting education and building out these pipelines of automating things. So that like the whole process of research from an idea to actual like analysis and manuscript writing, it becomes more cerebral in terms of the question being asked and less so on the methods, because methods are more or less defined and they're very much standardized within our field. The second part of my work is to actually take a software like engineering coursework and using that to design software and not just designing them, but after designing them, doing randomized controlled trials on looking at in half the number of like we're planning on doing like half clinics we're going to activate the system, half clinics we're not going to activate the system, and then comparing the outcomes between these two different arms as if like it's a clinical trial, and using that to show that it actually has a real world impact, not just on patient outcomes, on patient decision making, but also financially, because it helps reduce people's burden of how much they like in the healthcare system's burden of how many people are coming in from a certain disease again and again and again. And it helps like the economy as a whole because you reduce healthcare expenditure. And unlike blood biomarkers, which are completely dependent upon like if someone has like this machine stationed in their house or not, and how many machines they have and how many people that can actually function that machine have, like a software solution is scalable to no extent.
Wow, that is, it's going to change the healthcare world. That's what I think. I mean, as you're describing, I'm just thinking of all the people that this could possibly impact. And obviously that puts a smile on your face because it's going to have a huge impact. What I'm hearing you say is the old way of doing it would be, okay, we have an idea, we do a little bit of research, then we got to do clinical trials, 5,000, 8,000, 10,000 people. But you're still, it's not like shooting fish in a barrel, right? You're still, if you're talking about 100 million patients and we're just going to look at 10,000 patients, be like, yeah, this is pretty much how it is, and we'll just assume it's the same as everyone. That is not as strong of a statement as if you, and I'm assuming here, that you plug in somebody's blood work. They did an EKG. They do, what's the one where you have to like breathe and run on a treadmill type thing? Whatever that is.
So many different tests that can be integrated together and come up.
Yeah. So let's say you're plugging that into, you plug that into your system. And then I heard you say it's connected to Epic. So now you're looking at, I mean, every health system seems like uses Epic. I have heard that every Epic system is different, none of the same, but like, let's make the assumption that they are all the same. It's like plugging into Netflix, right? Like everyone plugs into Netflix and then you have the whole library, right? So your system is then going to, a doctor in Pittsburgh inputs all of these patient notes, all the tests that were run. You run it through the system, and your system then is going to look at everything in Epic, every other situation that's ever happened in the country, with this specific type of markers, and it will come back and say, hey, here is the recommended treatment for this specific patient that you just input. Is that accurate?
So broadly speaking, yes, but it's a little bit more nuanced. So the reason is that whatever, like in terms of discovery of like what are the big factors that help or that affect a person's characterization of risk, in terms of pathophysiological mechanisms, have mostly been like discovered or are being discovered. They're incremental benefits. They're not like paradigm changing benefits. The benefits that machine learning brings is that it's able to take into so many other factors and compress them together into an improved risk stratification. So some of the other factors that are not quantifiable are cultural. like what's the composition, for example, the Pittsburgh area or the East Pennsylvania. What's the culture of this place? What's the environment of this place? How is the water? How is the food availability? How is the social structure set up? Those things cannot truly be quantified, but they do show up in outcomes because these things affect outcomes. Machine learning can, because it's able to take a broad, like it's almost like an abstracted layer. Because it can take so much abstraction that these patterns can actually be hinting towards more underlying things that we can identify at a future time point when the machine learning models become more interpretable. But at least for now, it's able to integrate not just our known pathophysiology, but also these like environmental, social, cultural factors that would not otherwise be taken into account. So what I mean to say is that these things are regional. So whatever I develop here in Pittsburgh is going to be most applicable in Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. Now, there's enough research that if you add, so let's say somewhere in Indiana, if someone wants to implement an algorithm or developed here, ideally it should not be implemented as is. The way it should work is that this algorithm, it's already trained. So that's the good part about it. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But their system needs to be able to have data organized in a way that it can be inputted in this system. And then using some of their data, integrating it within our current model, and then predicting the performance goes up like about 50 to 60%. Just by doing a little bit of their data. So it's a little bit more hands-on, but at the same time, the return on the investment is just so high, especially in the key areas or the most common diseases, that this is like something that's worth an investment.
Absolutely. I'm glad you called out that nuance, because I mean, I was keeping it broad just because that my brain just always thinks that what's the 30,000 foot view of this, just so I can understand it. But I'm glad you called out that nuance, because Now what I'm hearing you saying is like the machine learning takes, I was looking at it as almost like a card catalog. I mean, did you ever have a card catalog at a library?
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, you input the EKG score and their blood scores and all these markers, and it's going to go out there and find someone who had something similar and say, hey, here's the treatment we used and it worked. That's very card catalog like. What you're saying is it will do that, but the nuance is it will do it specifically to someone in Pittsburgh, could be different to somebody in Los Angeles, and it's not looking at just the card catalog. It's going to come up with an even more improved outcome or an improved treatment plan based on all of the different factors that came from all over the region, specifically to you in Pittsburgh then. So, okay, that's way better. That's way more nuanced than I was thinking. So I'm glad I asked the question.
And that just like going back to what I was talking about, the way the traditional software are structured, like it will always lead to B. Here, depending upon which area you're in, A will not always lead to B. It depends on like really so many other factors that come into play, that A might be C in LA versus A might be B in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. No, I love that. I'm glad we called that out, because that was kind of the light bulb moment for me of like, okay, this is where this thing is so much better than anything we've got so far.
Right.
Gotcha. What's your wife think of all this research? I mean, she's an anesthesiologist. She's a pretty smart lady. Does a lot of this go over her head because, you know, she's not in the weeds of coding and machine learning all the time?
Well, I have her be my sounding board. So
okay.
Whether she understands it or not, she gets exposed to a lot of these technical terminologies all the time. Which she has professed, like she does not truly understand some of them or most of them at most times. But like just talking it out loud, I feel like it improves clarity within my own mental processes. And that's like, and at the same time, like it's funny, like depending on like compared to her other colleagues, like it seems like she has way more AI based knowledge than her colleagues, just because passively she's learning so many things. And between the two of us, like I always encourage her to do some research as well. And her take on it is that like I do enough research for the both of us.
That's good. I mean, Raul, that's pretty much the whole premise of the Doctors and Dollars podcast, is just me being the naive, financial mind asking questions of the healthcare, professionals and physicians. So, I mean, as a sounding board as it is, that's really my whole goal, is just to ask questions to get you sounding, like talking it out, to be like, okay, well, if you talk it out this way, and if you can explain it to Nate and he can understand it, like the same could be said for your wife. She's like, she hears it, she hears the terms, doesn't quite all make sense, but like it at least provides you some confirmation or some validation that what you're doing is good. And so, I mean, yeah, anybody listening to this episode and wants to be on the Doctors and Dollars podcast and needs a sounding board, come on over. I'll ask a bunch of dumb questions if you need me to.
No, it's something that's highly beneficial for me personally, is whatever questions are being asked by a clinician. So it's like, if I'm not able to, despite all our connection, if I'm still not able to communicate that well, I need to improve my rephrasing. And that's valuable feedback, like in real time as I'm developing systems. Because the whole point is for the clinician to actually use it in clinical practice, not just for a theoretical like happiness that you would get, like, oh yeah, I did this paper or whatnot.
No, that totally makes sense. We were talking before offline. Again, dual physician household. You have a really interesting take on what most people call work-life balance and what most people call the factors that lead to burnout. A lack of work-life balance can then lead to burnout. What you're doing on your daily basis professionally can lead to professional burnout. You have kind of an interesting take. So let's talk first about work-life balance and how you feel about work-life balance. And then we'll talk about the burnout side.
I think like my take on it, like I said, is everything is like in a research format. So my introduction to this concept is, and the background is, that you need to have the right conditions to be able to thrive in whatever you do. And in order to set you up for the future, that like whatever is your happiest thing that you feel most happy doing, you need to have the right circumstances and the situation that promotes it. For me, like the first thing that I did was to make sure that my wife was super happy. And in order for me to make that happen, like I actually had her go through like an exercise of what is it that means retirement to her? What are her best wishes that she would want? Like a house, car, what type of car, what type of house? Would retirement mean no longer working, or would retirement mean still like doing here and there some activities? And this was like an ongoing conversation for a while. And I had her quantify everything. And I took a back seat. I made sure that all her needs are met first. I have a financial advisor, like we sat down and I told, like, this is our priority and we need to get this rolling in this way. And of course, like I went and actually did a lot of like financial coursework myself, because I feel like
Of course.
like
you're probably a certified financial planner too at this point, besides the MBA and the masters and the...
I actually have like a Kaplan coursework for CFA level 1, like believe it or not. Like
my goodness.
I will dive deep into it. But I got enough knowledge to be able to at least have like an intelligent conversation about what my priorities are, and how do I communicate that. And like I don't have time to actually like sit through and see the different fluctuations within a market. And that's where I feel like I would need help with. But like most of the big things, like I already had a good handle on. So we made sure that yes, there is some sacrifices to be had, that in the short term, our savings is not going to go up as exponentially as other people, because like she decided that a 3 days a work week of doing clinical work is what would satisfy and gratify her the most. And I kept insisting, maybe 2, maybe 1. And like after a lot of thought, like that's what, like this is, to her, this is retirement. So I said, like, let's make that happen. The sacrifice is that in terms of life years, like in the way I thought about it is maybe we would end up like with like an additional 100,000 extra per year, like if you add investments and whatnot. However, like in general, like the way we lead our life, that's not going to change the quality of how we live our day-to-day life. It's not going to change, like maybe in the long term, all this accumulated savings will at some point of time in the future. But at the same point of time, for that envisioned future, you're sacrificing how many more years of your life and not living the lifestyle that you feel you would be happiest in. So like my take on it is from that perspective, that you need to have a lifestyle that you should feel that you're retired at all times. So I got her in that nice space, figured all of her stuff out, and then I said, now I'm going to work on myself. And that's where like this whole work-life integration like essentially ties into. There are certain activities that you do that you have to do as a part of, like, if you have to go and earn money. And like, for example, you go see patients. When we go to med school, we go through training. We do that to see patients, to get to help the most people. But then there's like these financial constraints, these administrative constraints that make you see certain number of patients per day, that restrict you on everything that you can practice in terms of what you can give, what they can get. And there's so many other barriers that come in that like essentially erode away on your sense of gratification, satisfaction, or however, which way you want to put it. I almost look at all of that, like, instead of frustration, I take a step back and I look at it as a systems problem. Now, it's not you, it's the system itself that promotes this type of things. Now, I know the boundary or the restrictions that are imposed upon me in my work job. How can I gain most value out of this? How can I make this whole experience, despite its frustrations, the most valuable? And there's so many aspects that you're exposed to that you don't even realize has so much value. For example, just the interaction with every single patient. Like, and it's fascinating. Like, I'm a good listener, so I usually sit down and I actually let my patients talk about whatever they want to talk about, and give it like 5 or 10 minutes. Like, so it's still within that time frame of the crunch that I'm supposed to be in. But just that very initial, like, letting people talk about what's on their mind helps me figure out what do they care about the most. And it's usually like, it's fascinating. If you had more time, people like talk in circles, and those circles tend to repeat themselves. And that's like the way I view it. It's almost like this bubble in their head. This is their immediate bubble that they care most about. And you help them reorient in terms of breaking that cycle. That's the psychological aspect of it. And then you provide a medication. And that, like, I feel like that is such a valuable experience to learn from so many people about their lives and about how a human factor of decision making or prioritizing works into play. And like in the future, whatever I implement or whatever I make, this is a huge factor that the individual for whom it is prescribed should be able to be wanting to take it. So that's like finding value in every single interaction that you do, and every single activity that you do, that you are forced into or you have designed for yourself, and that every activity has some form of badness or of some form of frustration, friction between your internal self of what it wants to do and what actually ends up happening. Aligning that and finding value helps reduce that friction. And the lesser the friction is, the more you become comfortable and the more like you smile a lot more. And that, like the work does not become like work anymore. It becomes something valuable that you're trying to do every single day. And you find like purpose and like more of a mission in life that helps you drive every day, do what you want to do. And sometimes it helps to like for you to do it more or on a more broader scale. But that freedom of mind only comes in when this friction is lost.
Have you thought about publishing these thoughts?
Maybe
they're good. I mean, yeah, so we always do. I ask just because we always take, the little 60-second YouTube clips. I think they're called YouTube Shorts. Anything for Instagram and social media for the Doctors and Dollars podcast. We always have these little clips. I mean, that 5 or 6 minutes there where you were discussing, work-life balance and burnout and finding the joy in life, that was powerful. Like that should be its own little section that we'll put out. Because like the first thing I heard you say that I was like, wow, that's a great way to think of it, is create a lifestyle that makes it feel like you're retired all the time. Like, I think that is just profound. Like, that's what we do with our Grand Vision family office. That's what we promote within Doctors and Dollars podcast. We have a 5-day financial challenge coming up that, people can look and say, okay, I'm here today. I'm at my point A. I know point B feels a lot better. My lifestyle is better. My happiness is better. how do I get from point A to point B? And that the 5-day financial challenge is a physician's way to at least take that first step, right? You've thought this through, right? You're very methodical. And I don't mean that's not in a bad way. That's a compliment.
No, I take it as a compliment. Like I always think of like everything can be broken down into like whatever is currently the state of affairs. What can I do about it in terms of methods? And then there's this like phase of trial and like failing and trial and failing and trial and failing and then trial and success. And that's when you start like you take a step back and you figure out what failed and what succeeded and why. And then you realign your life and change your habits. So one thing that you probably, like, of course you wouldn't know, is that in the last year and a half, I lost about 50 pounds just by diet alone, because like my schedule did not promote me to increase my exercise. And what I did was I actually quit taking sugar, period, from everything. Like I initially did a bunch of like a month or 2 to 3 months of intermittent fasting. And then I just like stopped sugar. Like I don't eat sugar outside of my kids' birthdays, like the actual birthday itself. And that I've lost it and I have not gained it back. And it's been so empowering for my own being. And this actually, like now that I've been through that journey, I think in my clinics, like I'm very forceful about like, you can do it.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the weight loss. That's awesome. I did notice over your left shoulder, though, I see a Peloton back there. So I got to imagine that's either you or your wife jumping on that thing and riding around. But no, that's cool. I love that you're methodical, because putting a methodology behind everything. And people think they hear methodology and they're like, oh, that's very professional. But like if you apply that to your personal life and create actual methods and processes that you conduct your own personal life, I mean, that can be very powerful too. I mean, just the thought about like having your wife list out, okay, all of the different things that would make her happy. Be very specific with what you want. Sitting down with a financial professional and saying, okay, here's our income, here's the goals that we have, here's what's most important to us. How do we design that? That's very important, I think, as well. But then as you're actually, what's the word I want to use, like practice, you're in practice of your process that you created, for you to, I'm going to butcher what you said, but it's like to find the happiness or to find the joy in each thing that you're doing. And if you can't find the joy in it, at least figure out what the purpose of that thing is. Like, as I talk to physicians, other ones that have gone through burnout, feel like they're in burnout at the moment, things like that. It all comes down to they're spending more of their time doing things that they don't enjoy. Like, there's the greater than symbol, right? The greater than symbol is facing all the things that they don't enjoy doing. They spend less time doing the things they do enjoy doing. And that leads to burnout. And so if you can create processes that create an equal sign, or at least flip that greater than sign to, I'm doing more of the things that I enjoy, and I will delegate, or at least at minimum find the purpose of the things I don't enjoy, and how can I don't know, be positive about them. That's either how you get out of burnout, or that's how you prevent burnout, in my eyes. What are your thoughts there?
I think that's like everything has sacrifices. Like, you cannot have every single thing, because again, we live in a limited world. The sacrifice could either be your time, or the sacrifice could be either like your lifestyle, or it could be your like amount of money you make. So it's like finding what that right balance is, and everyone has a different threshold and understanding. And some people actually don't even think about these things till you explicitly force them to think about them. But these are thoughts, like in order to have like a truly fulfilling life, I feel like you need to have these thoughts and go back, have like monthly days that you have for yourself to reflect on what is it that I did that added the most value to my own life. Not the people around you, but your own life. Like it added meaning to my life. It added value in terms of like maybe financial, and different time frames for the same individual might be different, because at some point of time in life, like people are more focused on like improving their financial situation. And once that stabilizes, your priorities change. For example, having kids. Before you have kids, you have very different lifestyle and very different way of thinking about things. But once you change, then once you have kids, like it changes how your priorities are, how you want to spend time doing. And all these things are more dynamic than we always look at it as a snapshot point of time that this is how 10 years would be. But it's Bayesian, like in terms of the methodology perspective. But it's that it adds on itself, and as it adds on, your 10-year vision would change. It has to change. Like what you were, like what Nate you were before 5 years ago is not who you are today, and is not what you will be 5 years from now. Your thought processes, your circumstances, your situation, everything changes. But knowing that change is something that will happen, and recalibrating your internal self and desires with that change is something that I feel like that's the most important thing one can do as an individual for themselves.
Yeah, that's powerful, man. That was very well put, well said. As you think about just a mindset of who you are today versus who you're going to be. Like who you are today is not defined by your past. We talk to our all the members, the physician members in our Grand Vision family office. We like the very first thing we do, we start with education, but like it's really like finding a blank slate or like clearing out the clutter of all the things in the past that have hindered you from financial success or personal success or relationship success. You know, a lot of that is like people define themselves like, oh, I am the way I am because of the past. And if people can change that mindset to say, I'm going to conduct myself, or I am who I am today because of who I want to be in the future, completely changes how you live your day-to-day life. It sounds like that's something that you believe in as well, in that you know that life changes. There's always going to be a fluctuation in some aspect of your life. And so to always be forward thinking, back to your 10th grade self, right? Creating a 5-year plan. When I was in 10th grade, a 5-year plan was not in my notebook. I had way different thoughts, but like to just be forward thinking and conduct yourself in the way that you want to be completely changes who you are today. It redefines who you are, and it doesn't define you by past mistakes or past things that you've done. I think that's really good. I was talking with not internal medicine doctor, emergency medicine doctor the other day, and she said something really profound. She said, time can only be spent. It's the only thing in the world that can be spent. You can make more money, you can save money, you can invest money. You cannot save time, you cannot invest time, you can only spend it. And I think that was really powerful to think like, man, if it can only be spent, it is limited, right? You can make unlimited money if you truly wanted to. You cannot have unlimited time. And so I think just being able to, I don't know, just this talk today has been very enlightening in that, like, being purposeful with your time, and then like the time that you aren't enjoying, at least finding the purpose in it to understand, okay, I'm doing this because it will benefit something else that I do enjoy doing at some point down the road in the future. It's a powerful thing. So I really appreciate you sharing that with me today. That was good.
No, for sure. And the analogy that I have for this, like exactly what you described, is don't be predictable by a machine learning model, which takes all your past and tries to predict the future based off on your past. Do not, otherwise there's no difference between you as an individual and an algorithm.
I'm gonna shorten that down even more. Don't be an algorithm. be a kind person. Don't be an algorithm. That's funny. Well, usually I end my show with asking someone like, what's the next 5 years look like for them? But I think you've done a really good job of laying out what your next few years looks like. It's very planned. It's very purposeful. You're going to create some amazing things. I'm really excited for you. I mean, even after this, I always keep in touch with past guests and check in on how they're doing. And, you know, if somebody's writing a book, I mean, you've written 100 papers. I would have had to follow up with you 100 times to say, hey, how did that go? But I'll keep an eye on you. And as things are progressing over these next few years, I'm excited to sit down and talk to you again and hear how things are going.
Certainly. I think that would be really nice. Absolutely.
Well, I look forward to when our paths cross again. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to talk to me, Rahul.
No, thanks. And I appreciate you inviting me over for this podcast. I think this is the first time I've just freely talked about things.
That's good. Hey, sounding board. Like I said, if you need a dumb guy that you just need to bounce ideas off of, I'm your guy. We'll talk to you later.
Sounds good.